Following Jan is just not where you want to be. Yeah, particularly, I guess, if you're the only scientist in the United States Congress and then have all of the typical charisma of the typical scientist. But, you know, I'm best known, actually, as being the only scientist in Congress, but I'm also a businessman who, when I was a 19-year-old kid, started a business in our basement that makes about 70% of the theater lighting equipment in the U.S. So, you know, the Crown Fountain, and Lyric Opera, all that stuff. So I spent a big part of my life in the theater world, you know, where LGBTs are not underrepresented. and so this is, you know, and actually, one last thing. One of the proudest times of my life was when our company's lighting equipment was used to light the White House after the Supreme Court decision, and that was neat. But you know, Jen is right. Everyone is right. The ACA repeal is the front line. And it is also correct that the Republicans are being caught in 7 years of lies. You know, they've been telling people that they have a plan that will, you know, where you don't have to buy insurance if you don't want, and then when you decide to buy insurance, you can demand your insurance with no, you know, pre-existing condition exclusion, which is actuarial nonsense. And they've known it, and they've won big politically for the last 7 years, lying to the public about that and other things about it. And I think if I had to guess what they're going to do is they're just going to block grant a whole pile of stuff, you know, keep big parts of, and that means that shifts the fight to the states, because states don't always do the right things with block grants. And you also have to look hard at the distribution of those block grants, which, you know, frankly, Rook, Illinois, you know, we lose about $40 billion a year because we pay a lot more in federal taxes than we get back in federal spending. A lot of these are the spending formulas for things like block grants. So we had to keep our eyes on that, just from a, you know, Illinois point of view. That's a big deal. Another thing, I'm you know, on the science committee. I'm mostly on the financial services committee, but at some point, I guess the leadership in Congress decided if they only have one scientist, maybe they should put him on the science committee. And so I spend a lot of my time looking at Republican priorities for research. And you know, one of the things we're going to have to keep our eyes on is HIV research. Because there are tremendous advances in adjacent areas, things like immunology and so on, all the miraculous cancer cures, you know, things like the Ebola vaccine that sort of slipped beneath the radar, but was fundamental. The same sort of progress should and must continue on HIV. And that's exactly the sort of thing they will quietly defund unless we keep our eyes open. And you know, there are also a huge number of issues with the federal workforce that will continue. One of the nastiest, scariest things that was passed recently is the Republicans have resurrected something called the Holman Rule, which allows them to arbitrarily lower the salary of every federal employee down to $1 per year. Any named federal employee, and anyone can just propose.
Is this civil servants too?
I believe so. I think it's an arbitrary, you know, it was some congressman from Indiana came up with it in the 1870s or something like that. And they have now resurrected it. I'm not sure it's all the way through the Senate, but that's one that will, you know, depending on how they use it, could just be hateful. And so there's a long list of things that we're going to be fighting. I'm not going to predict we're going to win a lot of those fights, but my general attitude is that we have to take on the Trump administration and the Republican majority sort of issue by issue. There are some issues where, frankly, the best thing is if Trump just quietly backs away. Things like his threats to walk away from the Iran nuclear deal. If he wants to walk away from it, just let him. But there are other ones where we have to make Trump and the Republicans pay the full political price for their fraudulent promises. And that's the wisdom that we're going to need. You know, some combination of the firebrands like Jan and you know, the
Smarties
people
like that.
You know, I live in a different world than Evanston, I have to admit. You know, I'm in the far suburbs. I actually lost my seat in the Tea Party wave after voting for the ACA, you know, back in the 2010. And so, you know, I have to watch my back, but, you know, there are, and just sort of, in many cases, just sort of quietly vote the right way and then change the subject, and that's what life is like in the far suburbs, and that is also what life will be like in all of the seats that we have to win to get back the majority, because that is really job one for Congress, is to set us up to continue the progress we have by reclaiming the majority. And so, anyway, that's...